objectives and more, some essential tools of acting and how to use them. So let's talk about objectives. According to Mike Alfreds, the British director and the author of Different Every Night, an objective is a want to be got, an intention to be gained, a mission to be accomplished, a goal to be attained, a destination to be reached, a purpose to be fulfilled, a longing to be assuaged, a hunger to be satisfied, and a number of other possible interpretations. An objective is not a feeling, an emotion, a literal description of what happens in the scene, a low-stakes task, a simple activity or errand, or a description of the physical movements or actions in a scene. For an objective to function as the driving force behind a scene, it must be infused with stakes. It has to be important. It's got to mean something to the character. It's got to drive you as an actor to want to actually pursue that objective. Something like a low-stakes task, delivering a message, for example, is a menial task. It's something that it's almost too easy to do. So your objective has to really be about a desire, a need, something that might be difficult to attain, but that is nevertheless something that you really, really need. So how do you come up with an objective? Well, there's some good tips from a practical handbook for the actor. And according to this particular publication, a practical handbook for the actor, an objective needs to be physically capable of being done. It's got to be fun to do. And what that means is fun for you as an actor. It's got to excite you as an actor. It doesn't necessarily mean it's got to make you laugh and smile, but it means that it excites you. It makes you want to get up and do it. So it's got to be fun to do. It's got to be specific. It must have its test in the other person, meaning it's got to be about something you need from the other person. It can't just be a general thing that you want generally in life. It's got to be directed at the other person. It can't be an errand. So this is, again, touching upon the idea of a menial task. It can't just be something simple that you need to do. It can't presuppose an emotional or physical state, which means it can't be based on a feeling or a physical condition. Okay, so I can't have an objective like to get them to see how sad I am. It's just not really an effective or a useful objective to have. Your objective can't be manipulative. So it can't be about manipulating the other person in the scene to feel something. I want to make them sad or I want to make them angry is manipulative. It's got to be about a true desire or want that is connected to the greater goals that your character has. It's got to have a cap, which means there's got to be a point at which you know that you have succeeded or that you know that you have failed. So that cap is like the end point of the objective. And it's got to be in line with the intentions of the playwright. So it has to make sense in context of the story. If I were in the Romeo and Juliet balcony scene, which we'll talk about a little bit as we go through the slides, and I was playing the role of Romeo, an objective that would not be in line with the playwright would be to get Juliet to leave me alone. Doesn't make sense. It's not what's going on in the scene, right? So my objective has to be in line with the intentions of the playwright in terms of moving the story forward for the characters. So what about obstacles? Obstacles are the things that get in the way of your objective. So in the Romeo and Juliet balcony scene, we could say for Romeo, his objective could be to convince Juliet that they are meant to be together. His obstacles might be that he can't physically reach her. He is technically on the orchard wall, right? Or he's just hopped down from the orchard wall and she is in the balcony of her room. So technically, although many people ignore this fact, they can't actually reach each other. It's dark. She can't really see him. Okay, another thing that we sometimes conveniently forget, because obviously in the theatre we have to light the stage, but it's nighttime and it's really dark and she can't necessarily see him at first. As he comes closer, perhaps the light from her room bleeds over and she can see him, but initially she can't see him. She doesn't actually know who it is at first. She's embarrassed about being caught revealing her feelings. So Romeo has heard her whole Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo speech, and then he speaks and she's embarrassed. She wants to take it back. Another obstacle, he can't speak too loudly or he might be apprehended by her family. And as a Montague, if he were to be found on the Capulet property, that's not going to be good for him. And Juliet even says to him at one point that the place is death for him if he gets found out. And the other obstacle that he might have is that she's actually afraid that they're moving too fast. There are a lot of moments in the scene where she sort of requests that he slow down, or that she says, maybe we just need to think about this. So these are all possible obstacles that Romeo might have throughout the scene, and there could be others, but these are just some examples. So what about tactics? So the tactics, or the actions or activities, as they're sometimes also called, the tactics are the individual things that you do in pursuit of your objective. So tactics happen moment to moment. Tactics are specific to a single intent, meaning you're just doing one thing in that moment. They can be described as transitive verbs or as short descriptions. So a transitive verb is a verb that sort of fits into the phrase, I something you. I berate you. I belittle you. I compliment you. I coddle you. You know, that's how you would refer to a transitive verb. And a short description is more along the lines of something that perhaps you can't find just a transitive verb, and it is more descriptive what you're doing. And we'll have some examples of those in a moment. The other thing about tactics is that they're always directed at the other person. We don't play tactics to ourselves. That is called being self-affecting. And it's not really useful in terms of playing out and playing in a scene and playing with other actors. So in the balcony scene, Romeo might flatter, he might bewitch, enchant, chastise, correct, he might encourage Juliet, so these are all transitive verbs. Or he might explain why they're meant for each other. He might assure her that their love is one of a kind. He might follow her instructions and swear his love. He might show her he's fearless in the pursuit of her affections. He might relinquish his name. And these are what we would call the short descriptions kind of tactics. Okay, so if you're having trouble coming up with just a specific transitive verb, sometimes just having a little bit more of a descriptive phrase is helpful in identifying what is the tactic that I'm playing here. The tactics are all in pursuit of the original objective, which in this case is to convince Juliet that they are meant to be together. Important, tactics are not feelings. My tactic can never be I get angry at him, or I show her that I'm happy, or I laugh. These are not tactics. These are just kind of things that are happening. So why can't these be tactics? Because feelings can't be planned in advance. Okay, I can't decide before I've played the scene that these are the things that are going to happen. I never know how I might feel or react each time I play a scene. And planning feelings is inorganic and it's untruthful, and that is not our goal. Our goal is to find tools that help us find a truthful embodiment of the scene, of our character within the scene. So we want to let go of this idea that the tactics are feelings. The feelings are a result of something that we're doing, okay? So they can't be the tactic. When I'm coming up with tactics for a scene or a monologue, I'm essentially coming up with a list of things that I might possibly do throughout the course of that monologue or that scene. And my feelings aren't things that I can, as I said, aren't things that I can control, whereas different tactics are choices I can make in pursuit of my objective. I can choose to belittle someone. I can choose to chastise someone. I can't really choose to be sad. That will happen or it won't. So this is why tactics aren't feelings. What we need to be interested in terms of feelings and tactics is what a feeling might actually make us do. That's the tactic. So if I play a tactic, let's say I try to compliment the other character, they react, and let's say they refuse the compliment, then I feel something. Perhaps I feel embarrassed. Perhaps I take offense. And as a result of that feeling that comes from what my fellow actor did to me, I play a new tactic. I do something different. And perhaps the thing that I do in response is that I chastise them for being ungrateful. Now, depending on the text of the scene, this is going to vary. But the important thing to remember is that my tactic is not to show them that I'm annoyed. That's not going to move the scene in any direction at all. I'm not trying to get anything from that person. It's not really helpful to the progression of the scene. Why? Because then if we're trying to use feelings as tactics, I have to put my focus on trying to achieve that feeling, and then I have to show that feeling instead of focusing on what I need from the other person. Acting is always about the other person. My job in a scene always is about what I need to do or what I need to get from or what I need to make the other person understand, what I need to get the other person to do for me, how I need to get the other person to change their perception or their point of view. It's always about what I need from the other person. So is showing that feeling really going to help you achieve that objective? Another thing to consider is that an emotion-based tactic really limits you. So if you've decided that you're going to be sad on this line and you're going to be sad, and that's your tactic, what happens if that's not what happens in the moment? What happens if your reaction is different and you don't feel sad? Do you then have to make yourself feel sad in order to line up with the tactic of sadness that you were planning? So another example, maybe in the moment you don't get annoyed at someone. Maybe you get upset or you get hurt or you feel amused. If you've planned your scene based on being annoyed, you have a problem. Because where do you go next? If you're sort of pinpointing this moment in the scene as being, this is where I get annoyed, and then you play the scene out and that doesn't happen, you're going to kind of get stunted in the scene and you're going to get stopped. If you've just got a group of different possible tactics that you might play for the scene, you've got a lot more flexibility to move forward through the scene, continuing to be in contact with the other person in the scene, getting something from them, affecting them in some way, and you're able to do it continuously and without hesitation. When we get stuck on this idea of feelings, they actually kind of bog us down and they can get in the way of the progress of the scene itself. Another important thing about tactics is that they're not literal descriptions, okay? So what I mean by that is my tactic shouldn't ever be, I tell her to stop, if the line I'm saying is stop. Or I sit down if I'm literally sitting down. It shouldn't be just a basic description of what I'm doing. The only time that I should indicate a physical movement as a tactic is if it's qualified with meaning. For example, I turn away from her to disconnect from the conversation. I sit down to let her know I'm not afraid. Okay? If it's qualified with meaning, then you've got something there. But a tactic is never just the description of the physical behavior. Why? Because we can see what you're literally doing and we can hear what you're literally saying. You need to know why. You need to know why you're doing those things. It's your job to know what's going on underneath. It's your job to know the reason for saying the line or the reason for executing that particular movement at that moment. That is the tactic. The reason for doing it. So in the instances we just talked about, if your line is stop, any number of tactics could apply. For example, you could be silencing someone. You could be trying to alarm someone. You could be rejecting someone. You could be imploring someone. So if you've limited yourself by saying your tactic is, I tell her to stop, you're not really allowing yourself the possible colors that line could have. At the same time, if your movement is to sit down, any number of tactics could apply to that. Maybe you're letting them see how comfortable you are. Maybe you're relinquishing control. Maybe you're shrinking away from the other person, or maybe you're disconnecting from them. So just to say that your tactic is to sit down doesn't really give you enough to play with. You need to have options of what are the possible things that could be going on in this moment. So some other examples. Instead of I raise my voice or I get louder, try something like I assert my authority, or I silence them, or I insist on being heard. Instead of something like I get quieter, try something like I back down, I soften my argument, I placate them. All right, these are about why you might get quieter. And the result of these tactics could be that you get quieter, but it's not sort of stuck in one static place. In a nutshell, tactics are intentions that serve each moment. So they're kind of like mini objectives. We need to be interested in why we say things, why we do things, not just in what we say and do. When you're coming up with tactics, you need to ask yourself, is this a literal description? Is this describing a feeling? And if it is doing either of those things, then it needs to change, because we don't want a literal description. We don't want the description of a feeling. That's not a tactic. And then you can ask yourself, okay, is this what I intend to do? Is the tactic that I've come up with what I'm intending? Is it about the other person? And if your answer is yes, then it's probably a good tactic. So that's a good little kind of recipe for you. When you've come up with some tactics, ask these questions, and that will help you to determine, have I got a good tactic, or do I need to address it and rethink it? Let's take a minute to talk a little bit more about feelings. So Stanislavski's system, according to Mike Alfred's, is essentially I want something, therefore I do something, and as a result, I feel something. Acting is not about being emotional and trying to feel. It's about doing. An actor cannot play an emotion. Emotion, how and what we feel, is an outcome. The outcome of either succeeding or failing to get what we want. If actors pursue their objectives by playing appropriate actions or tactics, and honestly and openly trying genuinely to affect their partners, and in turn allowing themselves to be affected by their partner's responses, then feelings will quite naturally be aroused without any conscious effort. So this calls up all these things we've been learning about focus and being able to suspend your own disbelief and really actually be absorbed in the moment of the scene and really be connected to your scene partner. Not just sort of thinking about your own process and what you want to feel and how you want to show the scene or the monologue in terms of what feelings are coming through. You need to be focused on what you want. You need to do what needs to happen in order to try and get it. And then as a result, if you're really focused on that and you're really invested and committed to those things, then feelings may arise. If we want feelings to be truthful, they need to come about as a result of doing something, not just conjured out of nowhere. Feelings and emotions, our inner harmonics, are a direct result of the success or failure of our tactics and objectives. I want something, I try to do something in order to get what I want, and as a result of the doing and the responses of the person I'm in the scene with, I will feel something if I am truly connected and dedicated to achieving that objective. If we're trying to achieve something and we're not succeeding, our inner harmonics will be affected. We might be frustrated, we might get annoyed, we might feel angry or upset, we might feel helpless or agitated, etc., etc. If we're trying to achieve something and we are succeeding, our inner harmonics will be affected. We might feel encouraged, we might feel happy or excited or enthusiastic, inspired, passionate, right? But that's a result of what's going on, whether we're succeeding or we're not succeeding. The feelings are the result of getting or not getting what we want, just like in life. So how do you use all this? As you begin to work on a scene or a monologue and you play with it in a bunch of different ways, you might find that a certain objective or goal starts to appear. You start to feel like you know what it is you're trying to achieve or to get. You might start to feel like you're trying to do something or to get your partner to understand something. Once you can pinpoint what the want is, so for example, maybe I want my friend to admit that they betrayed me, then you can focus your attention on achieving it. Okay? So once you've played the scene or the monologue a few times and you start to notice what it feels like you're doing, then you can get specific about what that want is and you could really put your attention on trying to achieve it. And the ways you can do that are you can think your objective as an inner mantra before you begin. So just thinking it over and over and over in your head before you begin the scene, before you begin the monologue. You can say it out loud to yourself before you begin, once or twice or 3 times. You can keep it in the back of your mind as you play the scene. So that sort of ties in a little bit to the inner mantra, but instead of just having that as an inner mantra before you begin, you continue to hold that goal with you as you play the scene. However you choose to focus on your objective, it must be with focus and you must suspend your disbelief. You've got to let yourself give in to the imaginary situation. You've got to believe that you need it. If you don't believe that you need the objective, then you're not going to be able to really commit to it in a way that's going to arouse any kind of felt responses. You've got to be able to pop yourself in that circle of attention between you and the other person in the scene. And that's true whether it's a monologue or a scene. Okay, if you're doing an audition monologue, you are still in a scene with someone. They just may not be in the room. But you still have to treat the situation as though they are. So that imaginary person in that context is in the room with you. So you need to kind of remember that as you're exploring monologues. When you're in a scene with someone and you have the other person, it's a little easier to remember that you're directing these things at that actual person. But you've got to believe it. You have to be able to commit and invest in the objective that you're playing. Your obstacles will come up as the scene plays out. So as you continue to explore playing your objectives, you're going to notice that there are certain things that are kind of making it difficult for you to achieve your objective. You might find that you react to those obstacles in certain ways, okay? And this is where your tactics come into play. So you always need to be playing a tactic or an action in the Mike Alfred's terminology. And if a tactic stops working, it needs to change. So if you're trying to play a tactic and you're getting met with some sort of obstacle, but you're continuing to try and play the same tactic, that's not working for you. So the tactic needs to change at some point. Having a variety of tactics available to you is way more helpful than just playing one tactic over and over and over and over again. And it's more interesting as well to have a range of tactics available to you. You might also notice that when you're faced with obstacles, your inner harmonics wake up and you'll start to feel a certain way. So that inner harmonic might be the reason for the next tactic that you play. So you need to be able to go with it and see where it leads you. And this is the basis of finding truthful feelings in acting. So there are a few things coming into play here. One, you need to know your text really well. You need to know the scene or the monologue really well so that you can allow it to sort of unfold as you start to react and respond and notice things like obstacles coming up in the scene. And you also need to have explored a number of different tactics, a number of different possibilities, so that in any given incarnation of your scene or your monologue, you have options available to you and you can kind of just chop and change as you need to. You're not going to get stopped up if the specific tactic that you decided on seems to not be the one that you need. If you have played in your process with a bunch of different possibilities, then you've got a bunch of things available to you. So in any moment, you can chop and change and you can bring something new in, or you can have a different response based on what's happening in the moment. So the process is that you need to work out what your objective is based on what it feels like you want during the scene. And this is going to be informed by your given circumstances. Then you need to decide on a specific objective for the scene and use that as an inner mantra before you begin the scene, or any of those other techniques that I suggested. Let it be the undercurrent to everything you do. That is your focal point. You've got to achieve that objective. Notice what each line feels like in terms of tactics. What does it feel like you're doing each time you speak? It might be different with every single line that you say. There might be times where a couple of sentences are serving one tactic. There might be times where one word is one specific tactic. So you need to become sensitive to what every little tiny moment feels like when you speak it. And then you also need to play with, can it be something else? So giving yourself different options that could be played out in different ways, so that when you get to that final experience, or the opening night, or even the second or the third or the fourth night, or wherever it is in the run of the show, or wherever it is in terms of how many times you've done the audition piece, you have options to have flexibility at any time. So you're not getting stuck just with one set of tactics. You want to note down the different tactics that you feel like you're playing as you're working on a piece, and then choose a way to begin the scene. So you want to choose perhaps the first tactic that you're going to play, and then see what other ones come up each different time you approach the piece, and allow new and different ones to come to you. So for the rest of the scene, once you've started with that one tactic, you're going to allow yourself to react to whatever your partner does. Whether they present an obstacle or encourage your objective, you're going to let yourself react truthfully to whatever happens. In the end, ultimately, every time you work on a scene, you'll end up with an outline of the given circumstances and the objectives and the obstacles and the tactics. That'll be something like this. So the given circumstances, anything relating to the environment, the relationships, the situation, previous circumstances, etc., etc. Your objective, what you are trying to achieve in the scene, what you want from the other person. Obstacles, the things getting in the way of your objectives. You'll identify those as you continue working and playing through the monologue or the scene. And the tactics, the individual actions that you play that help you achieve your objective. And these will also kind of accumulate the more you work on a piece and the more you explore different possibilities for different ways that you can approach the text. There are so many possible tactics that you could play with any one line of text. So if you think about that in context of a whole scene or an entire monologue, you can really give yourself a comprehensive list of tactics that could be possible throughout the course of a monologue or a scene. How you come to these pieces of information, how you come to these decisions about given circumstances, objective, obstacles, tactics, doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter if you want to sit down and think about it and write down some options, or if you want to just get up and play the scene a bunch of times and then jot down the things that come up for you as you play. As long as in the end, they are specific. Particularly your objective has got to be specific. Your obstacles, you need to know where they're coming up in the scene so that you know the moments to listen for within the scene or the monologue. Okay, where are the moments where the character is really dealing with something that's getting in the way? You need to know those things. And you also, of course, need to have that range of tactics to play with and to choose from when you get in the moment and things are just playing out in front of you. So there's your overview of the sort of the system for analysing a scene or a monologue. And this is really what we're going to be working with as we continue moving through the semester.